did my mandatory service back in the late Cold War era, in the capital, guarding one of those government ministry buildings everyone assumes are normal from the outside. Now people talk openly about what those places really are, how deep the basements go, how big the underground sections can be. The one where I served was exactly like that. Deep, massive, sprawling. You didn't take an elevator down, you took an escalator, like a subway station. Entry was by credentials only. Double checks. Layers of security. At the end of the workday, only duty shifts remained. The protective doors were sealed, doors the engineers liked to brag could survive a direct blast. After that, nobody went in or out without the duty officer knowing. My post was considered lucky. When the daytime staff cleared out, only me and my partner, my second, stayed assigned to that position. It was located so that nobody could approach without being seen, which meant that in the evenings, once everything was secured and quiet, we could actually breathe. We did what bored young servicemen do: patched uniforms, wrote letters, drank tea, worked out, joked, killed time. That evening started the same way. Everyone left. We finished the checklist, heated water, made tea. It was a Friday night, and the duty officer for the underground shift was a decent captain, one of those rare ones who didn't harass people for no reason. Everyone was looking forward to an easy Saturday. Then, out of nowhere, Major Rourke showed up. The call came from lower. He ordered us to send him up. Engineers in that underground section were different from regular command. They didn't care much about parade ground nonsense. If you did your job, you were fine. You could talk to them like normal people, ask for things, joke with them. Major Rourke was one of the good ones. He wasn't petty. He didn't punish people just to feel important. He had quirks, sure, but who didn't? And as an engineer, he was gifted. The kind of man who could listen to a machine and understand what it wanted. I could tell you stories about him, but even now I won't. When the major came up, he was in his operational uniform, smeared with grime, exhausted, and clearly irritated. We poured him tea, asked what happened. He said a mechanism had failed at the far node. The far node was exactly what it sounded like, the farthest service point in that entire underground section, more than a kilometer away down a long access corridor. A couple of conscripts had already been sent to fix it. They couldn't. So the major, head of the section, went himself. He'd spent almost 2 hours down there and still couldn't understand why the mechanism refused to work. That's why he was late. That's why he looked like he'd been chewed up. The mechanism was auxiliary, rarely used, not urgent. There was no reason to repair it immediately. He drank tea, calmed down, changed into clean clothes, and said he was going home. I personally walked him to the exit of the underground complex. Then I returned to my post and went back to killing time. About an hour and a half later, the assistant duty officer called and asked me if Major Rourke had left. I was surprised, but I said yes. He'd left almost 2 hours earlier. The assistant gave a strange little sound and hung up. At the time, I didn't think much of it. A few minutes later, he called again and asked if I was absolutely sure. That's when I tensed up. I repeated, yes. I personally escorted him out. The assistant duty officer was a warrant officer I knew well. I asked him what the hell was going on. He said someone had called from the far node, introduced himself as Major Rourke, demanded power to be restored to the far node, and then hung up. After that, the far node stopped answering internal calls and the public address system. The control desk can see exactly where a call originates. No mistake. And the far node, it's called that for a reason. Nobody casually walks a kilometer underground for a prank. especially not to call the duty officer and impersonate a major. Also, after the workday ended, the main pressure hatch leading to the far corridor was sealed, an enormous hermetic gate. You couldn't open it without the duty officer knowing. The control desk was confused, but they restored power to the far node anyway. Maybe the caller was busy. Maybe he didn't want to answer over the PA system. Still, it was a serious breach of procedure. Half an hour later, the control desk tried to call the far node again. No answer. They assumed Major Rourke finished whatever he was doing and left. For some reason, they forgot about the sealed hatch. Then, after they cut power again, meaning the far node went dark except emergency lines, Major Rourke called again almost immediately, demanded power back on, and hung up. Again, no response afterward. That was the second time the assistant called me. I again confirmed the major had already left. He said nothing and disconnected. I didn't understand anything. Yes, there were other access points into the underground complex, but one was reserved for very special use and opened rarely. Another was sealed at night, and overall, you couldn't enter the underground section without the duty officer knowing. I had friends in the guard unit. I called the credentials office and asked if the major's pass had been surrendered. They said yes. That meant he could not physically be inside. They also told me that the control desk had called them a minute earlier with the exact same question. I started to feel a slow, heavy pressure inside my chest. There were theoretically 2 more ways to reach the far node. First, the kilometer-long corridor ended with a second massive hermetic gate, one even the control desk couldn't open without special authorization. Second, the far node had a connection to a different underground section. The simplest explanation was that someone came from there, used the phone at the far node, and impersonated Major Rourke. But that route was also sealed and alarmed. It was in direct view of another duty post. If anyone tried to force it, it would be noticed immediately. And this wasn't some backwater warehouse. Nobody played pranks like that. Then the duty captain himself called. Like I said, he was a normal guy. He spoke to conscripts plainly. In his usual rough, half-joking tone, he asked what this far node and Major Rourke nonsense was supposed to be. I told him I had no idea what was happening, and I didn't understand what anyone wanted from me. The captain said that if this was a joke, he'd gotten it, but it wasn't funny anymore and needed to stop. I repeated, I had no idea what was going on, and I personally watched the major leave nearly 2 hours ago. To be honest, for a moment I suspected the captain was messing with me. He had that kind of humor, but not on duty. Then the captain's voice changed. He said the far node had just called again, Major Rourke's voice, and demanded that I be sent there, and that I bring a repair kit and the set of feeler gauges from his desk. That's when my brain just stalled. I told him that was impossible. The major's pass had been surrendered. The major was out. The captain paused, then asked if I was accusing him and the assistant of losing their minds. And here's the thing. Even by phone, Major Rourke had a distinct way of speaking, a very particular cadence, hard to confuse with anyone else. As for the pass, sure, you could imagine that at the end of the day, when crowds moved through checkpoints, maybe he slipped back in after surrendering it because guards knew him. It was possible. Still, I insisted it had to be some idiot prank from somewhere. But the captain said after the second call, he had asked the other underground section to verify whether anyone was at their far access point. They reported nobody there. The captain said he didn't want to embarrass himself in front of another unit, so he ordered me to go to the far node and see what was happening. By procedure, I had every right to refuse. I wasn't supposed to leave my post, but I had a good relationship with that captain. We'd helped each other more than once. So, still half convinced it was some stupid misunderstanding, I took the repair kit and the feeler gauges and went. The repair kit was just a bag with wrenches, screwdrivers, and tools. The feeler gauges were more interesting, like a Swiss Army knife, but with thin metal blades of different thicknesses, used to set tolerances. That particular set was buried in a stack of paperwork inside the major's desk. If the captain hadn't told me exactly where it was, I never would have found it. I grabbed a flashlight and headed out. I had to pass through the control desk. The captain and the assistant stopped me and asked if I'd noticed anything strange about Major Rourke earlier. I said no, other than that he looked unusually tired. I repeated that I believed the calls were a prank, because at that moment I truly did. The captain said, "Still, go." So I went. When you're young, you don't take strange things seriously, until you do. But while I walked that long corridor, something started pressing down on my nerves. I can't explain why. Normally, I felt comfortable underground. I wasn't afraid of tunnels. I liked being alone on night shifts, rare peace in a system that never leaves you alone. But now, for the first time, I felt wrong. At one point, I even broke into a jog for part of the walk, despite the heavy bag bouncing at my side. The corridor ended at a vertical shaft about 20 meters high. It used to have an elevator. Later, the elevator was removed. The only way up was a ladder staircase. Instead of the elevator, they'd installed a hoist system used for lifting equipment. I climbed up and immediately noticed that the safety gate around the shaft was open. That was unusual. It should only be open if someone was moving cargo. I didn't see the major. From there, the corridor continued another 50 meters and turned sharply right. I thought the major must be around that bend, but the feeling in my gut got worse. Not exactly fear, more like deep discomfort. I called out loudly for the major. No answer. I checked the room where the mechanism was located. No one, but the lights were on. A cabinet was open. The wiring diagram was partially disassembled. I turned the lights off and stepped out. I closed the shaft gate and continued down the corridor. The phone I was supposed to use to report back was near the very end. No one there either. That's when real fear hit me. I don't know why, but something about being that far underground, alone, with the phone silent, the corridor humming, it got into my bones. I switched on my flashlight even though the overhead lighting was enough. I remembered the open shaft gate and suddenly feared the major might have fallen. I went back and shined the flashlight down. The shaft was empty. I yelled the major's name into the void until my throat hurt. Nothing. I returned to the phone, called the captain, and reported. The far node is empty. No one here. The captain was silent for a long moment. Then he asked where Major Rourke was. I told him I didn't know. I swore I hadn't seen him since escorting him out earlier. The captain cursed and told me to return immediately. I hung up and started back toward the shaft. And then, I heard the shaft gate. A very specific sound. A scrape, a rattle, the metal mesh vibrating. Impossible to confuse. And instantly my fear eased. Good. He's here. He's alive. I rounded the bend and saw him. The shaft gate was open. Major Rourke stood right at the edge, his back to me. The overhead lights were bright enough that at a distance of 30 meters, I could not mistake him. I shouted, relieved. He heard me and turned his head, still standing at the edge. He was wearing his operational uniform again, and for a split second I wondered when he'd changed. I could see his face clearly. I even saw him smile when he recognized me. Nothing about him looked strange. I slowed down, and then the major slowly raised his arms over his head, like someone had quietly ordered him, hands up, and he began to fall backward. At first, my mind refused to understand. He was looking at me, smiling calmly, and falling. I screamed and ran, but I was too far. Right in front of my eyes, Major Rourke dropped into the open shaft. I didn't reach the edge. My body locked up, like paralysis. For a moment, I truly couldn't move, only listened as he fell without making a sound, scraping the shaft frame as the mesh rattled. Then, far below, came an impact. I sprinted down the stairs. 20 meters isn't infinite. Maybe he'd caught something. Maybe he'd survived. By procedure, I should have reported the emergency immediately. It didn't even occur to me. My mind was gone. I was running on raw instinct. I reached the bottom, struggled with the tight latch, forced the lower shaft doors open, and there was no one there. No body. Nothing. That's when I genuinely thought my mind had snapped. I looked up, hoping he'd caught on the framework. The shaft was built from metal channels and mesh. The light inside was dim, but enough to see clearly. Nobody was stuck. Nobody had caught anything. The shaft was empty. For a moment, I felt a sick, impossible relief. If the shaft is empty, he didn't fall. But I saw him fall. I heard him fall. I heard the mesh rattle. I screamed his name, swearing, pleading, pure hysteria. No answer. Only the hum of the lights. Only my own blood pounding in my ears. And then fear came in a different form. Not the panic of seeing someone fall. This was deeper. A fear that lived somewhere in the spine, the gut, the bones. One thought: run! I ran like I've never run before. I only stopped when I reached the lit, occupied area near the control zone. People, voices, reality. It loosened the pressure in my chest, slightly, and then my brain tried to work again. What do I tell the captain? I can't say, I watched the major fall into the shaft and then vanish. And I couldn't go back to check again. The very idea made my stomach twist, but I couldn't pretend I saw nothing either. So I decided to tell the captain that power had failed at the far node, and it needed to be checked again, and that he should send someone else. I reached the control desk, shaking so badly my legs wanted to fold. The captain and the assistant stared at me. My face must have been something else. They asked what happened. My throat locked. I couldn't speak. Everything I planned to say vanished. I could only force out one word: Rourke, and nothing else. The assistant smirked and said, "Relax. Everything's fine with the major." After my call from the far node, they had dialed the major's home phone, and Major Rourke himself answered. He was already home. He was surprised by their call. He confirmed he had gone to the far node earlier and couldn't fix the mechanism before end of day. He said he'd finish it tomorrow. At that point, I stopped understanding anything at all. What did I see down there? Had I finally cracked? The captain and assistant could tell something was wrong. They kept asking questions. And then, like an idiot, I asked, "If the major is home, who was calling from the far node?" The captain's mood darkened instantly. He said they'd handle the jokers. Then the assistant called me by name and asked what happened, why I looked like I'd seen a ghost, and where was my cap, and where was the tool bag. That's when I realized I was holding only the flashlight. No cap, no repair kit, no gauges. I hadn't even noticed. The captain seemed to understand my panic. He lowered his voice. "Don't worry," he said. "Tell me what happened. Nothing goes beyond this room." And for some reason, that reassurance cracked something open in me. I felt the tiniest bit of relief. I didn't give full detail. I said that after reporting the far node was empty, I thought I saw the major. But when I approached, he wasn't there, and I got scared being alone underground. Technically, I didn't lie. I just didn't mention the fall. The captain and assistant exchanged a look. The captain shoved a mug of tea into my hands and told me to sit and stay quiet. They went into the break room and shut the door. I heard them talking low for several minutes. I drank tea without tasting it. It felt like something inside my head had blown a fuse. I almost calmed down. Only the shaking wouldn't stop. The mug rattled in my hands. Then I noticed a blinking indicator on the control switchboard, a call light. And as I stared at it, that deep pressure returned. The captain and assistant were still talking behind the closed door. The call light kept blinking. I couldn't stand it. I stood and checked the source, the far node. I called for the captain. They rushed out and stared at the board. The assistant hit the loudspeaker. From the speakers came a soft, pleasant static, almost like wind, with faint whistling woven through it. That was wrong. The communication system underground was excellent, crystal clear, like the person was standing next to you. But this was static and whistling. The assistant demanded the caller identify himself, again and again. Then, through the static, loud and clean, came one sentence. "Do not start it on Delta." The accent, the cadence, the voice sounded very much like Major Rourke. Then the line went dead. The assistant immediately tried the PA system. No response. At that moment, I felt fear again. Sharp, cold, physical. The captain exploded. I'd never seen him like that. He grabbed phones, called multiple lines, cursed, threatened to destroy whoever was joking. Then he looked at me and said he was pulling me off duty and sending me back to barracks, and I was to keep my mouth shut. I protested. Being removed from a shift is serious trouble. I insisted I'd done nothing wrong. The captain said he'd file it as special duty assignment and mandatory rest for safety. He promised me leave privileges if I kept quiet. And honestly, I already understood. I was useless in that state. When my replacement arrived, I left for barracks. The unit duty sergeant already knew something. He asked only, "You alive?" and told me I was not to be woken until midday. I thought I wouldn't sleep. I collapsed instantly. Before lunch, the duty sergeant woke me and told me there'd been an incident. Major Rourke was dead. Fell into the elevator shaft at the far node. Fatal. Strangely, I felt nothing in that moment. Maybe because I'd just been ripped out of sleep. Maybe because everything inside me was already burnt out. Later, men from the engineering section came and told us what happened. That morning, the captain had spoken to Major Rourke by phone and carefully mentioned the strange calls from the previous night. The major found it hilarious. He didn't take it seriously at all. They even argued about it. The captain forbade the major from going to the far node alone and demanded that any work be formally logged. The major, annoyed, sent a corporal, one of the guys who had failed to fix the mechanism, to the far node ahead of him, and then went to the control desk himself. They had a long conversation. By the end, the major wasn't smiling anymore. Two things shook him. First, the set of feeler gauges mentioned in the call was the major's personal tool. He'd brought it only the day before, used it at the far node, then hidden it deep in his desk under paperwork so no one would steal it. Meaning, nobody could know it existed there. Second, the phrase, "Do not start it on Delta," had a very specific meaning. The mechanism's fault only appeared when the motor windings switched to the Delta configuration. The major had not told anyone about that, not even me. The captain briefly suspected I was involved, but the major vouched for me. We had a good relationship. I'd even visited his home during leave once. Still, the major promised he'd come speak to me later. That was the plan. Instead, he went to the far node. The corporal waited there. 20 minutes later, The corporal called the control desk in panic and reported that Major Rourke had just fallen into the elevator shaft right in front of him. He begged for instructions. The captain ordered him to do nothing. Do not approach. Do not touch anything. Stay by the phone. Wait for responders. When the responders arrived and opened the lower shaft doors, they found the Major's body. Broken limbs, skull damage, clear fall from above. At the top, they found the corporal barely conscious, still clutching the phone receiver in his hand. The captain sealed the scene, ordered everyone back, and reported upward. Then he questioned the corporal. The corporal said he arrived about 10 minutes before the Major. While waiting, he stepped around the bend to smoke so the Major wouldn't smell it. As he took his last drag, he heard the shaft gate scrape open. He crushed the cigarette and walked toward it. He came around the corner and saw Major Rourke standing at the edge, back turned. The corporal didn't call out, afraid the Major might startle and fall. Then, this part was strange. The corporal said it felt like someone behind him quietly called the Major's name. He turned. No one. When he looked back, Major Rourke was now facing him, smiling, staring through him. Then the Major slowly raised his arms over his head, as if obeying a silent order, and calmly fell backward into the open shaft. The corporal ran to the phone and called the control desk. He stayed there until responders arrived. I listened to this story almost without emotion. Maybe my mind couldn't react anymore. Maybe I already knew what I was going to hear. The investigation was quick. The medical exam confirmed the Major was alive when he hit the bottom. No signs of assault, no alcohol, no drugs, no motive for suicide. They declared it an accident. The corporal was listed as a witness, then vanished from the unit soon after. I never learned what happened to him. There were consequences. People got fired, command replaced, papers moved, careers ended. The captain and assistant received discipline, even though, officially, they hadn't violated procedure. But neither of them ever stood duty again. The captain left service not long after. The assistant transferred out. I recovered fast. I was young. My mind was still resilient. At first, there was numbness, a kind of apathy that prevented me from thinking too hard. Then thoughts came. Then the thoughts faded. I kept standing shifts. The underground didn't scare me. I walked to the far node many times after that, sometimes alone on purpose. Nothing happened. The captain and assistant tried to speak to me about it while they were still around. I avoided those conversations until they stopped asking. I'm a simple person. I don't like turning mysteries into religion. As we used to say back then, the day passed. Forget it. I finished service. I went home. I got married. A son was born. Life moved on. I stayed in contact with old friends from service.
Life went on the way life always does. Quietly, stubbornly, pretending nothing waits behind you. And then one evening I called an old friend. He lived far away now, another city, another life, but we still spoke sometimes. The line connected, and instead of his voice I heard it, a soft static, calm, almost comforting, with a faint whistling woven through it. It took my mind a second to remember. My body remembered instantly. My chest tightened. My hands went cold. That same sound, the sound from the far node. I hung up. I told myself it was nothing. I called again. The same static, the same gentle whistling. I called other people, friends, family. Everything was normal. Only his number answered with that sound. I finally forced myself to stay on the line.
After a few seconds, his voice broke through, cheerful and alive, as if nothing was wrong. He said everything was fine, said he was going to a wedding the next day. I don't know why I did it. I tried to talk him out of going, not urgently, not hysterically, just quietly, as if I already knew it wouldn't help. He laughed, asked if I'd finally gone crazy. I laughed too. What else could I do? The next day he was stabbed at that wedding. He died the day after. I didn't feel shock, only recognition. That sound hadn't been a warning, it had been a mark. That's why I don't like phone calls anymore. Some connections are never meant to be answered.